Mike Florio from ProFootballTalk.com joining us on the show. Any surprises here, Mike?
Well, the big surprise was Rob Chudzinski out in Cleveland yesterday. Usually the surprises come after the season ends, but that was the big thing Sunday that just kind of unraveled as the day went on, and then Chudzinski's out 1 year in. It's just a shock that a Browns team that had given off the vibe that they're going to be like the Eagles were when Joe Banner was the CEO there. Take it slow, take your time, have continuity, and then boom, 1 year in, they get rid of their head coach. A guy who was a lifelong Browns fan who has admitted to me that he used to eat dog biscuits when he was a kid.
But you don't fire somebody unless you have somebody to hire. I would imagine, whether it's D.C. or Cleveland or Minnesota. Would you assume that the Texans, Bill O'Brien looks like he's going to get hired there from Penn State? Would you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes what happens, Dan, a team will fire a guy because they know there's someone they can get that they view as an upgrade, but sometimes you just have to get rid of him and get anybody, and it's hard to tell which of these jobs fall into which category. You get the idea the Browns have an inkling. I think with teams like the Redskins and the Vikings, they just knew that they needed to move on. And in Houston, O'Brien is the guy whose name's at the top of the list, but that's not done yet, and we've seen this before. Until it's done, it ain't done. Last year, Andy Reid was supposedly a 95% lock to go to Arizona, and he ends up in Kansas City. So there's going to be a lot of that heavy lean, this guy's got this job, that guy's got that job. Until they have the press conference, anything can happen, and that's going to be pretty much life for the next couple of weeks.
Well, also, I don't know if Oakland's ready to fire, their coach. Sometimes, can we get that guy? Then we'll fire our guy. If not, then you probably say, well, let's hold on for another year. If you look at the end of the day, end of the week, Detroit have a new head coach or fired?
I think Schwartz will be out. It's hard to tell with the Lions because the organization doesn't say much, and they've been very patient and very loyal, probably to a fault, with some of the guys like Matt Millen, who they kept a lot longer than they should have. And then they made his top lieutenant, Martin Mayhew, the general manager, the guy who was there in the front seat for all of the mess that went on. He's the GM, and he's been the GM, and there are questions about whether or not he's in trouble now, too. But, anytime you've got a meeting with ownership the day after your regular season ends, that's not a good sign. And that's what's happening with Jim Schwartz today in Detroit. So I think the tea leaves point to him being fired. Question is, how high up the ladder does it go?
Best potential job opening is where?
Hey, I'd love the Detroit job. I mean, you've got Calvin Johnson and Ndamukong Suh, Reggie Bush. My concern would be Matthew Stafford, though. There are so many vibes coming from that kid that suggest maybe he's not as coachable as he needs to be. He's got a delivery point that ranges from conventional to Kent Tekulve at any given moment, and he doesn't want to take off-season coaching. He doesn't think there's a leadership problem. He needs to be the leader of that team, and he has declined to do it. You need a coach that's going to get the most out of him.
Yeah, that one's sort of baffling because Jim Schwartz seems like a micromanager, hands-on with everything. And you said this yesterday as we're watching the Lions. Matthew Stafford is just sort of on his own. Do I show up for meetings? Do I put in the effort? Do I have a quarterback coach? He's been given too much freedom at such a young age.
And there's a lot of undisciplined players on the Lions. And the challenge
that stems from the coach.
If you're going to have undisciplined players, you got to be able to get them together and get them to play on game day. And Jim Schwartz is a Jeff Fisher guy. Fisher can take undisciplined players and make them disciplined for the most part on game day. Schwartz has had trouble doing that.
He's Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com. Anything else you're hearing that we should be aware of? Any controversy? The Chargers ending?
You know what? In Pittsburgh, and Bill Levy, who was the guy who supposedly handed the Steelers the Super Bowl 40 trophy, well, he took away the potential Super Bowl 48 trophy with his crew missing that call. It was a blatant error. 7 guys stacked on one side of the line of scrimmage on a field goal try. New rule this year, but it was a foul. Don't be surprised if the NFL admits today that they screwed that up. The Chiefs should have had another shot 5 yards closer to kick the Steelers into the playoffs. And, this year, if you would have gotten a seat at the table in the AFC and you're the Steelers with all that experience and all that talent, it's very easy to put the dots together and say the Steelers could have gotten to the Super Bowl.
What about Jay Cutler's future? Texans are on the clock with the number 1 draft pick. Peter King said the Rams want to trade out of that number 2 spot. What do you see here handicapping the offseason?
Well, I'm sure the Rams would give that second overall pick to the Redskins for 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick if they want to do it again. And that's the final pick. That number 2 overall pick is the final piece of the RG3 trade. Texans are a quarterback away. So many teams a quarterback away. You were talking about the Browns. You've got 5 Pro Bowlers in Cleveland.
Yep.
You've got more Pro Bowlers than wins in Cleveland. If you get a quarterback in there, that team is going to be what the Chiefs were this year. We've seen 5 teams that made the playoffs last year be among the worst teams in the NFL this year. Every year it can happen. And the teams out there that are really bad, their hope increases dramatically if they can just find a quarterback.
Have we seen Cutler's last pass in Chicago?
We possibly have. You know, this is going to be a stare down between the Bears and Cutler over whether or not they use the franchise tag. And the thing about the franchise tag, that becomes the starting point for your long-term deal. And you quickly get over $60 million on a 3-year window if you use the franchise tag. The Bears may not be able to use it, and if they don't and Cutler hits the open market, he could take less money somewhere else if he just wants to stick it to the Bears for not giving him what he thinks he's worth.
Any indication with Minnesota, what direction they would go in? I heard just about every other job but Minnesota.
Well, somebody reported, I think Schefter, that they're interested in the Denver coordinators, and one of the folks that follow me on Twitter said, "Oh, they're going to hire Peyton Manning to be their head coach." So, Jack Del Rio played for the Vikings, and he was okay as the Jaguars coach. I just think we've seen this formula too many times where you elevate a coordinator who just can't get it done. Now, Del Rio did it to a respectable level in Jacksonville, but with guys like Lovie Smith and Ken Whisenhunt out there, guys who have taken teams to Super Bowls, even though they haven't won them, that would seem to be the way you go this year because of what Andy Reid did in Kansas City in only 1 year.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate you joining us.
All right, see you, pal.
That's Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.